I'm telling you to leave. You woman who can only give birth to girls. The one glaring at me with utter contempt was my husband, Jake. I instinctively rubbed my belly. I had borne 3 daughters through this belly, in pain, for Jake. But what Jake really wanted was a son. I still remember how after giving birth to our eldest and then our second daughter, he said, "Next time it will be a boy." When our third daughter was born, Jake even left the naming all up to me. Ah, is this finally heading to divorce? I felt like sighing. With a faint smile, my husband assured me not to worry about a successor. There's already someone else who can bear him a son. I'm Susan, a full-time homemaker. And I just turned 40. I live with my husband, Jake, and our 3 daughters. It's been 3 years since I gave birth to our third daughter. This month, I've decided to quit being a homemaker to go to work. It's because, on Jake's salary alone, we couldn't afford to provide lessons for our 2 older daughters. I decided to work for the sake of our 3 children. Fortunately, I found a job quickly, and now I'm managing to cover our household expenses while working. Lately, Jake's been griping more and more about how his folks are getting on in years, and that I should be the one to take care of them. Would be a big help if you could quit your job to look after my parents, Susan. That's out of the question right now. Why? We can live comfortably enough on just my salary if we don't splurge. Splurge? I've never done that. I'm working because your paycheck alone won't cover extracurriculars for the kids. They don't need any extracurriculars. It's perfectly fine if they don't learn anything extra. This is the kind of nagging I always get from Jake. That's why I've learned to just brush it off whenever he brings it up. Are you even listening, Susan? I hear you. I'll do what I can to help out. Honestly, I can't stand my in-laws. I genuinely don't want to help with their care. But Jake and I live near his parents' place. It was his idea to start our married life in an apartment close to them. At the time, I didn't know their true colors and thought it'd be convenient for me, too, saying naively that it would be helpful. But it didn't take long to see their true nature. About 6 months into our marriage, my mother-in-law asked me to help clear space for a big table she bought so we could all gather anytime. That's when I started helping out at their house. I found myself constantly bossed around by my in-laws, being told where to put things, to tidy up, to serve tea, like some kind of servant. Being newly married, I couldn't handle it well and just kept helping as they told me to. Because of that, each time I visited their house, they treated me worse and worse. Every visit, I was like a little maid, having to listen to the in-laws boast about the old days or complain about their struggles for what felt like hours. And then, they'd end up meddling in our private life, pressing us to quickly produce a male heir. Even my husband, who said he wanted kids, would say things like, "Of course, I'd prefer a boy. Actually, if it's not a boy, there's no point in having one." When I was pregnant, all that those 3 cared about was the baby's gender. When they found out our first child was a girl, they insulted me and said things like, "Well, there's a saying, first a girl, then a boy. She'll be handy to have around." When the second and third turned out to be girls too, the in-laws openly lost interest in them. They'd just keep saying, "Next time, make sure it's a boy." Why is this house such a mess? There's no rowdy boys running around, and still, you use being busy as an excuse. Can't you even clean properly? Maybe it's your laziness, that's why you can't have a boy. All these girls and all they'll do is get married off elsewhere. They can't be successors. You should be taking care of us, the heads of the family, instead of wasting time on girls who are no use as heirs. To think these are their own grandkids they're talking about. I never invited them in the first place, and I sure as heck don't want to go to their place. Being dragged to their house and treated like this is more than I can stand. I've told Jake countless times that I want to keep our distance from his parents, but it's like talking to a wall. The house being a mess is a fact. Girls are supposed to play quietly and read books, right? Instead, they just scatter their stuff everywhere. If you can't manage housework and childcare, which are supposed to be a woman's job, then it's no wonder you're being criticized. How can you say that when we're both working to raise our 2 kids? It's impossible for housework and childcare to be only my responsibility. If working is your excuse, then just quit and be a stay-at-home mom. If you can't do that, then what my mother's saying is right. You think you can support me and our 3 daughters on your salary alone? That's why I'm working, too. It gives me a headache just thinking about it. Sure, there was a time when men worked and women took care of the home and kids. But those days are long gone. Now it's normal for wives to work, too. But to accept the changing times while still insisting that housework and childcare are solely a wife's responsibilities is just too convenient. No matter how much I try to convince him, Jake just won't change. Mom's right. It must be as Dad says. Every time I heard these words, thoughts of divorce crossed my mind. But my daughters, oblivious to everything, were fond of Jake. Only the eldest, a middle schooler, seemed to have some reservations about Jake. Being in the throes of adolescence, she didn't seem to be very interactive with Jake. Yet, whenever I saw the third girl innocently laughing and clamoring to be held by Jake, calling him Daddy, Daddy, I couldn't bring myself to go through with a divorce. 3 months had passed since then. For some reason, Jake started coming home late more frequently. I was suspicious and asked him when he returned home. Jake, you've been quite late recently. Is something up at work? No, it just happened today. A junior messed up, and I had to cover some overtime. Don't worry about it. At first, I believed his words, but he began to come home late more often, and I asked again. Then Jake started making excuses like he was held up at work entertaining clients, or meetings with partners ran long. Even as I started to suspect Jake's words and actions, I couldn't muster the courage to take that step away because I didn't want to deprive my children of their beloved father. I started to pretend not to care about Jake's late returns. Half a year had gone by in this way. A colleague I worked with mentioned seeing Jake walking in the downtown area with a young woman. I dismissed it to her, saying Jake was at work, but she insisted she wasn't mistaken. Our families are close, often going camping or having barbecues together on holidays, and my daughters are around the same age as hers. Jake and she always got along well whenever they met. So I knew she couldn't have mistaken someone else for Jake. But even knowing this, my desire to trust Jake was stronger, and her suggestion to approach him next time made my heart skip a beat. I told her I'd talk to Jake about it, hoping it was just a misunderstanding. I went to see a private investigator immediately after work and requested a surveillance operation. 5 days later, the investigator got back to me, saying it had been quite straightforward. When I met the investigator after work, I was presented with substantial evidence. There were several photos of Jake entering a hotel with another woman, and the results were incriminating. I decided to confront Jake about the affair as soon as I got home. Though he had gotten home before me, he was just looking at his phone in the living room. I saw my eldest daughter take her younger sisters to her room. And while I felt sorry, I couldn't keep it to myself. Jake, can you explain this to me? You said you were working overtime or entertaining, but is entertaining clients at a hotel part of the job? Jake didn't respond to my words and just started making a phone call with a cold expression. For some reason, Jake remained silent, determined not to speak. So your silence means you admit it's true? It's none of your business. You really think a husband's affair is none of his wife's business? It's none of your business. No matter how many times I asked, Jake only repeated that it was none of my business. Then, suddenly, the doorbell rang. While I was thinking of pretending we weren't home, Jake quickly went to open the door. In came my in-laws and the woman from the investigator's photos. What's going on? Did you call them here? I hadn't planned on telling the truth until everyone arrived. Well, now that everyone's here, explain these photos. I challenged Jake again with the photos. The girl there is pregnant with a boy. Our family has always needed a son to carry on the family line. I told you before we got married that we needed a son. But you kept having girls. So, you're no longer needed and should leave right away. Just when I thought Jake was starting to make sense, he handed me a divorce paper with an explanation that didn't make any sense.
Hold on, pregnant? How many affairs do you need to have for that to happen? Sure, I knew about the son issue, but we can't choose the gender of our babies. Besides, you always seem to love our daughters.
Susan, you've heard the story, but you're someone who could only have girls. Just leave this house quietly.
I'm sorry, but I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to my husband, Jake. What's going on?
As I pressed Jake for answers, my in-laws interjected.
That's enough. We're finally having the boy we always wanted. It's best for you, who couldn't do anything, to leave. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to you, Jake. So why do both of you come barging in? Don't try to change the subject.
At my words, my husband lets out a heavy sigh. Enough already. There's no need to discuss this. All Susan has to do is leave this house quietly.
What are you saying? We have 3 daughters. And you know as well as I do that it's impossible for me to support all 3 with my current income, right, Jake?
That's none of my business. You're the one who wanted to have 3 girls. Just get out already.
Don't be ridiculous. What do you mean, wanted? You used to dote on all 3 of them too, didn't you, Jake? Why would you say something like this all of a sudden?
I thought my husband would say something in response to my words, but it was his mistress who retorted.
Oh, this is why dealing with an older woman is such a hassle.
When you're told to leave, you should just leave gracefully.
What are you even doing here? It's because of you showing up that our family is in this mess.
Mess?
Don't you mean it's your fault for not being able to have a boy?
The mistress sneers at me with a snort. I painfully realize that I've expected too much from my husband. We have 3 kids, and our youngest adores her dad, so I wanted to believe that divorce isn't the only right answer. I thought he would think of the children when faced with the evidence. Even if he didn't have a change of heart and we couldn't be a happy family, I believed he would at least act the part of a good father in front of the kids. But in reality, he shamelessly brings home not just his parents but even his mistress.
I understand. I'll file for divorce.
I was too naive. That's what I realize as I stand up to pack my things. I had thoughts about the mistress, smirking as she watched, but I didn't care anymore. I snatched the divorce papers from my husband and signed them. I write my name as the guardian for our daughters.
I'm taking custody of all 3 girls. I'll be filing for alimony and child support later. I'm leaving now, but I'll come back for the things I can't take with me today. Do whatever you want.
My in-laws, who usually make snide remarks, listened to our conversation with dissatisfied expressions. It seems they've left this discussion up to my husband. Knowing this, my husband confidently tells me off. Feeling the tense atmosphere, I hug my eldest daughter, who has been cautiously observing from the room. Maybe she understood just from that because she immediately started packing her things. The middle and youngest daughters, thinking they are going on an outing, cheerfully prepare their to-go bags. Even as we gather our bare essentials and head for the front door, no one comes out from the living room. The middle and youngest daughters look puzzled, but when they wave goodbye cheerfully, they leave the house in high spirits. I call my parents' house. I haven't been home much since I moved far away after getting married. Despite the sudden call, my mother tells me to come back as soon as I can. They offer to pick us up, so we decide to stay in a hotel for the night. There, without telling my daughters about their father's affair, I explain, Daddy and Mommy are just heading down different paths now. The younger 2, who love idols, recall a recently disbanded group who had said the same thing.
Does that mean we can't be together anymore?
It seems my eldest understands what I'm saying. I return to my parents' home with my daughters, and we are swamped with changing our family registry and various other legal and administrative processes. And before I know it, 2 months have passed, and I successfully received alimony and child support from my husband and his mistress. I had filed for compensation for the affair against both, and additionally for child support from my husband. Not wanting to see their faces ever again, I conducted everything through a lawyer. It cost money, but it was worth it to avoid the stress. The lawyer's visit to my in-laws to discuss alimony and child support was met with their silent bitterness, like they were swallowing a bitter pill. Nevertheless, my husband had an affair and even got another woman pregnant, which looks bad to outsiders. To prevent more complications, both my husband and my in-laws hastily gathered the funds for payment. It seems they even covered the mistress's portion of the alimony. Another 3 months go by. While we can't afford luxuries, my parents have supported us, and the 6 of us have been able to start living a peaceful life together. I was just beginning to get used to life without my husband, as were our daughters. On his day off, my husband suddenly called me. When I ignored him, the phone kept ringing over and over. I thought it would be trouble if it kept ringing until our daughters returned from their lessons, so I reluctantly decided to answer my husband's call.
Good, you finally picked up. What do you want all of a sudden? Well, you see, the woman I cheated with just gave birth. What am I supposed to say to that?
I was about to hang up coldly when my husband suddenly raised his voice.
The legs! I mean the crotch!
According to my husband, the child that his mistress had given birth to was a girl. Moreover, it wasn't a case of a mix-up during the ultrasound. The doctors had been saying it was a girl from the start. The mistress had lied about the baby's sex because she wanted to marry my husband, who apparently would have considered divorce if it weren't a boy, but his parents put a stop to that. They were worried about not having any grandchildren if things continued as they were, so my husband called off the divorce. He was supposed to be thinking about having another child right away, but his life was in shambles, and he couldn't focus on that. Right after the birth, she couldn't work and had no income. She'd refused to do housework perfectly because of child-rearing, and she flatly denied doing any caregiving for my in-laws. Of course, if you're living with a baby who may or may not have a steady head yet, it's going to be like that. It's tough to take care of household chores perfectly when you're desperate with a baby, and you don't have the physical strength or spare energy to take care of elderly parents. Yet, living with this new wife, my husband now told me he was thinking of divorce again.
So? What do you want me to do about it?
I responded coldly, and my husband said, "Susan, please, can't we start over?"
Huh? As if I have any intention of getting back together with you now.
I lashed out at him.
Don't talk like that. Despite having thorns like a rose, you're delicate and bloom beautifully, aren't you? I love that about you, Susan. Let's give it another try.
My husband was trying to hold me back with his poetic words. Those words gave me chills.
Susan, are you listening? We've been together for a long time. Your feelings haven't changed just because we've been apart for a bit, have they?
Perhaps I would have been moved by my husband's words of love if this were back when we were married, but after discovering his affair and getting a divorce, all I could feel was coldness. I just gave a bitter smile.
You're smiling, so that means you forgive me, right?
My husband happily misunderstood.
Huh? You're totally clueless. That was a bitter smile. I'm not laughing, and I haven't forgiven you. Why do you have to say that? Susan, please consider getting back together. Haven't we always been doing well? You were happy with me, weren't you? We were not doing well, that's why we fought so many times. I wasn't happy, that's why I divorced you. It was you who said you didn't need me. That's true, right? Then we can start over. It was me who suggested we break up, so I'm suggesting we start over. Let's do it.
My husband started spouting nonsense about wanting to reconcile. He even brought up old times, and honestly, I was fed up. But then, a thought struck me, and I changed the subject. Oh, about Kate.
Why do you know her name? She didn't introduce herself that time, did she?
My husband sounded surprised when I mentioned the name of my remarriage partner. Of course, I know.
I heard it from the detective, and I even sent a certified mail for the alimony claim. And about her. What about Kate? I was just wondering who she might be targeting next. She has a hobby of breaking up seemingly happy couples or married people, and since you and I are divorced, I was wondering who the next target is.
My husband said nothing. Perhaps he was speechless, mouth agape. I proceeded to explain to my unresponsive husband what I knew about this woman named Kate. Kate had always been adorable since she was a child, always surrounded by various people. Her father, the company president, doted on her, and she was spoiled, always getting what she wanted. It's precisely because she could get anything she wanted that taking things from others became her hobby. As an adult, her targets became other people's boyfriends, fiancés, and husbands. Since taking things was her hobby, she would easily discard them once she managed to start a relationship. When I introduced her dating history, investigated by a detective, to Jake, he gasped in a strangled voice.
What the heck? Why bring this up now? If you told me this when we were getting divorced, I wouldn't be in this mess. Back then, all you said was get out. You never listened to my side of the story. So, I did as I was told and left. It's not like a woman who approaches a married man can be considered good-hearted.
Don't talk like that. Susan, it's so sneaky of you, making it sound like it's my fault. If you had just explained things properly back then, it would have been different. Jake, for some reason, started to speak in a defeated tone, playing the victim when he spoke to me. Angered by his words, I snapped at him.
What are you on about? You're the one in the wrong, not like you are wrong. Why don't you just live however you want? I don't care anymore.
At my words, Jake suddenly spoke in a softer tone.
Susan, it's going to be tough raising 3 daughters all by yourself. Let me take at least one of them. If you let me take one, you'll have an easier time. Aren't 2 kids enough?
The cloying sweetness in his voice was so vile it made my head spin. What in the world does he think of our daughters? I could never send them to live with such a man. Neither Jake nor his parents really want the girls because they love them. He kept saying any girl would do, or just one, talking about them as if they weren't people. I could only see a future where they would be preyed upon by Jake and his parents. I knew that as they grew up, they would receive the same terrible treatment I did. That's why I refused adamantly.
Don't be ridiculous. I will raise my daughters properly. Don't be like that. A child needs her father, don't you think?
Jake argued defiantly.
A father who can't even raise his kids properly, let alone cheats, has no right to custody.
I spoke firmly, to leave no room for misunderstanding.
Even so, it's up to the girls to decide if they want a father like that. They're too young to decide for themselves now, so I'll take responsibility and raise them.
Enraged, I conveyed my feelings and hung up the phone on Jake. I don't know if it was because I immediately blocked his number, but I never heard from him again. Months went by. It seems Jake and Kate's divorce went through without a hitch. Kate went back home with her newborn child. Apparently, the child's father is also married, and she is being sued for alimony not just by Jake but also by his actual wife. Strapped for cash, she seems to be working hard at raising her child with the support of her parents back home. Terrifyingly, she shows no signs of remorse. She is aware that what she's doing is wrong, and if caught, she pays alimony as a sign of her sincerity. However, it seems that the money is also being provided by her father, who is a company president, allowing her to live a carefree life. It appears that the reason Kate went after my husband was just a whim. With her natural beauty and status, she would freely take other women's boyfriends and married men, and she decided to target married men as her next conquest. It just so happened that Kate set her sights on Jake and me when she saw us in town. It was a complete nuisance to have our lives disrupted by her caprice. And the reason Kate decided to marry Jake, something she usually didn't bother with after taking a man, was because Jake was indecisive and indulgent towards her. It seems Kate wanted a man who would treat her like a princess, indulging her every whim and buying her whatever she desired. Now, I couldn't care less about it all. I was stunned by the sheer audacity of not just my easily swayed husband but also Kate, the woman he cheated with. My husband Jake was deceived by his affair partner, but he had the chance to refuse and didn't take the bait. No matter what stories I hear, the fact that Jake betrayed me won't just disappear. I also heard that Jake's family was ostracized by friends and relatives and had moved far away. They only stormed into my house once after the move. Susan, stop being stubborn and hand over one of the kids.
That's right, Susan. It's not good for a child to receive all the love from just one parent. We'll raise her together, the three of us.
Please stop.
I'm fine raising her on my own.
Thinking that my youngest daughter, who was still too young to understand, would be okay, the three of them came with a menacing look to take her away, and I resisted desperately.
You can't handle it, Susan. You can't raise her while working.
Hand her over, Susan. Poor thing. Don't worry. We'll raise her properly. No matter what I said, they wouldn't listen.
Stop! Don't take her! This is kidnapping!
My youngest daughter cried loudly, and I screamed just as loudly. Thanks to our cries, the nearby residents gathered and quickly restrained the three of them. After a while, the police arrived from a call and took the three away. I repeatedly thanked my neighbors, relieved that my daughter was safe. Later, the three of them received a restraining order. But I'm considering moving. Because a restraining order isn't enough to make me feel safe. Since they know where we live, it wouldn't be strange for them to show up at any time. I've discussed moving with my parents, who live with us, because I feel sorry for them too. They said they'd dispose of the house and move with us, as it would be a nuisance to be followed forever. Still, I feel guilty for changing my daughter's environment so often. Yet, seeing their smiling faces and healthy growth heals me. I've decided to move to a new place to protect them. Just before moving, I got a call from an unregistered number. Thinking it was the moving company or someone from the city office, I answered, only to find it was surprisingly Kate. Summing up her sobbing story, she had apparently gotten into trouble for being with too many men and had contracted a serious disease. I need money for treatment, so give me back the alimony, she cried, but I responded coldly.
Don't you have a wonderful dad who buys you everything? There's nothing I need to do for you.
Her audacity was too much, and without much of a response, I just hung up. I immediately blocked her and bought a new cell phone, so now she can't reach me anymore. I'm grateful to my parents for coming with me, and I'm determined to keep working hard for my daughter's health.